Welcome to the Vault Archons. I am the Keeper of Keys, Kraz, and today we are going to look at unusual cards. So the first cards we're going to look at come from House Brobnar. This house has, in my opinion, the smallest number of cards that have unusual effects, or useful effects. There's a lot of fight cards in there, but these are the ones that I think have some kind of interesting mechanic to add to the game, besides readying and fighting and readying and those kind of cards. So the first one here is, of course, Burn the Stockpile. This is one of the strongest Amber Destruction card in House Brobnar, and amongst the weaker Amber Destruction cards in the game. So I still have a slight cold, so I apologize for that. After that, we're going to look at Piles of Skulls. This is a proxy card because I don't actually have this one. This one's really interesting because it allows you to capture a considerable amount of amber by destroying your enemy's creatures, and it just stays in play unless your opponent has a way to destroy this artifact. It can be a really, really powerful amber control tool. And then the last one here is an artifact, again, that gives every single one of your creatures +1 to their attack. There is one other card I didn't put in here. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head. I couldn't find it when I was going through, so I apologize for that. The next house after that we're going to look at is House Shadows. Shadows has some interesting cards that do some kind of unusual things. The first one is Treasure Map. Now this is just an unusual card if you need a good amount of amber in one turn. Now this is going to reduce your ability to play cards on your turn, but if you just need 4 amber, you have nothing else you can really do, this can be a really good card. Great first turn play. After that we've got Shadow Self. This is the only card that I know of that absorbs damage from the creatures around it. So this card is able to absorb the damage entirely. There's no way to get around Shadow Self. You can't avoid it with by avoiding their taunt and so on and so forth. So this is the best protection card for another creature in the game, and the only one that does this kind of effect. After that we have Miasma. This is the only card that I can think of that stops key forging from your opponent on their turn other than stealing their amber. So this is basically, you can't forge your key. This is the only card of its type, and it belongs to House Shadows. After that, we have just one of the potentially largest amber steals in the game, because this one, even if they have 20 amber, you can take all but 6 of it. Now, it's not always going to be the biggest amber steal, but this is a pretty big amber steal card. If you have any other steal card in your hand, this is a great one. Just a great effect. And I did include amber stealing cards and stuff in this selection. I did not include board wipes. I don't know why I didn't choose to. I just didn't include board wipes. So after that, we have the Sting. Now, this is an unusual card. The Sting is, I can't think of very many ways to use this card effectively without really causing yourself problems. I'm sure it's possible, but it seems to be a really hard card to pull off. But a very interesting one nonetheless. If your opponent's going to forge a key, you're going to get all the amber afterwards, and then you can forge a key. But you're going to have to do 2 turns of Shadows, and there's a lot of ways this card could backfire, but still a really interesting effect, and the only one like it. After that, we have Bait and Switch. An amazing card. Really, really powerful. Really, really nice card. It's just going to continue to steal amber until your amber is at least equal to or higher than your opponent's. So just a great, great stealing card to get rid of a lot of your opponent's amber. After that, we're going to look at House Sanctum. Now, I didn't have the key forging card from House Shadows. I haven't gotten that one yet, and I haven't printed out a proxy yet. The first card in House Sanctum we're going to look at is Epic Quest. Epic Quest is a very interesting key forging mechanic. You play it, you archive all your knights, and then you have to play 7 cards from Sanctum in a row to use its Omni. And once you do play 7 cards, use its Omni, you get a free key. It's the only free key, technically, that exists, except for one that can potentially be made in House Mars. So, very interesting card. After that, we've got Blinding Light. This is just an across-the-board stun. I included it just because it's one of the few stuns where you can stun all the creatures of an entire house instead of having a limited board. I don't know if I would say it's any more powerful than the other stuns, but still an interesting card nonetheless. I included Virtuous Works because this is just a 3 amber gain. It's a big amber card. And there's only one other card that gives you more raw amber than this, and that one also gives your opponent 2 amber. So this is just a great, amber card. I included Glorious Few because this is one of those few cards that actually rely upon your opponent having more creatures than you. If your opponent has a really large board and you have Glorious Few and some kind of way to wipe their board, this is just a fantastic card. You're going to get a tremendous amount of amber when you play this card. So, great card to have. After that, I included Doorstep to Heaven because if your opponent has 6 or more amber, this is one of the bigger wipes. It's not a steal, but it will just wipe their amber all the way down to 5. So, very powerful amber stopper. Great card. After that, we're going to look at Untamed. Now, Untamed has some interesting cards also. One of the first cards we're going to look at in Untamed is Mimicry. Mimicry is a very fascinating card because every action card that you've seen so far, every action card in the game can be repeated with Mimicry. Your opponent plays Library Access. Well, unless you have Logo, it's not going to be very useful, and since you're probably on an Untamed card when you play Mimicry, not as good. But there's other effects that you can copy with this Library Access, so you can just ignore that one. It's actually not very good to play. Keyhammer, Bait and Switch, Doorstep to Heaven, the list goes on and on where you can copy their effects and just do great things with this card. On its own, it doesn't do anything other than copy cards, but copying cards from your opponent's discard can be incredibly powerful. There's a lot of things you could do with this card. So if you had the right cards, Mimicry can just do some crazy stuff. After that, we have Nepenthe Seeds. Now, Nepenthe Seeds are basically the best card for returning a card from your graveyard. Or sorry, from your discard. And the reason that is Nepenthe Seeds are Omni, so they can be used at any time, on any turn, no matter what house you've declared. So you can use these to do things like play a Library Access, Nepenthe them back out, play another Library Access, Battle Fleet. There's just a lot of things you could do. You could technically do double Keyhammer with this thing and do some things that people probably haven't really considered because it only says on Keyhammer, a great example of why this would work, and nobody's probably thought much about this, but if your opponent has forged a key on their previous turn, you unforge it. Now, that doesn't mean, I don't know if that's going to be interpreted that you can't unforge another key or not, but you may be able to potentially unforge 2 of their keys using that. Don't know. I'd have to talk to the rules lawyers on that one. But still, this card can be used just for a lot of crazy effects. Get really powerful cards back, like Bait and Switch, like all kinds of stuff you can just bring back with this card just as needed. So great card to have. After that, I included Fog Bank. The reason that this was included is because this card right here makes it to where your opponent can't fight with their creatures on their next turn. And so this shuts down their options. It's great to have cards that will shut down your opponent's options. So this is just a great kind of unusual card that exists in the game. And so just a nice one to have overall. Chota Hazri, this is the only creature in the game that can forge a key. So I included him. He's Just like Key Charge, you lose 1 amber and then you forge at current cost. And because he's a creature, he can be brought back by cards like Regrowth and other cards that can bring creatures back that you couldn't normally bring back unless you use something like Nepenthe Seeds or things that actually can bring back any card from your discard. So very interesting card also. After that, we have Key Charge. Key Charge, of course, is a forge a key outside of your regular step. Fantastic card to have. Great card to have if you can generate the amber to take advantage of it, and your opponent can't stop you unless using things like Key Hammer. Another card we're going to look at is called Fertility Chant. This is a really good card. It's a 4 amber gain. Yes, your opponent gains 2 amber in the process, but it's really a tremendous amount of amber. And as long as you don't put your opponent over that 6, and you're not going to play this if you do, as long as you don't put your opponent over their 6, there's other ways for you to stop them as long as you have those cards ready and waiting. So a great card nonetheless. After that, we're going to look at Mars. Now we're going to look at the first card in Mars we're looking at is Mass Abduction. Now Mars is one of those houses that has cards that can actually archive opponent's creatures, which is an unusual mechanic in the game. I do not believe the other houses have archive other creature cards anywhere in them. I believe Mars is the only house that can do this mechanic. And this is just a really, really good way to get rid of creatures. This isn't Purge, but this card is incredibly powerful because as long as you damage 3 creatures, you can pull 3 creatures off the board with this, throw them in your archive, and if you really don't want to see those creatures again, you just never pick your archive up. So this can just be an incredibly powerful card, and they have no way of getting those cards back unless you pick up your archive. So great, great card. After that, we're going to look at EMP Blast. Now this one is the most powerful artifact clear in the game because it can remove all artifacts. Now it does have other effects when it's played, but other than that, it's still a really, really good card. Now it is going to stun all your Mars, it'll stun all robots, but it's just by far the best artifact wiping card. If you're playing somebody who has a lot of artifacts, this card is really good because it's going to destroy all of them. After that, we're going to look at Phosphorus Stars. Now this is one of the most interesting stuns in the game because it'll stun everything except for Mars, and that's really powerful because it's not just a house like the Sanctum one was, it's all creatures except for Mars. That's really powerful because it shuts down every one of their options if they have a multi-creature type board. So it's a really, really good stun. Now you do gain some chains on this one, but still a great, great card. After that, we're going to look at one of the more interesting ways of amber stopping, and this is Shatterstorm. Now Shatterstorm's a really weird amber stopper because you have to give up your own amber in the process to do this. But you can wipe a tremendous amount of amber with this. If you play this card and you have 5 amber, that's 15 amber for your opponent. So the triple multiplier on this can just be absolutely devastating to your opponent if you need to use it in such a manner. Really good card, really interesting card. One of the only cards that does something like this. After that, we've got Key Abduction. Now Key Abduction, again, is another very interesting card. It forges outside your normal key forging step, which is one of the things that make this card as interesting as it is. Now, I don't know what the ruling on this is, whether you can bring it back down past its regular cost. As far as the card reads, it looks like you possibly can. If you can, you could potentially bring a card down to 0, which this becomes really powerful with other cards that would synergize with it, like Battlefleet, which I believe is the next card under this. But this is just you can forge a key, you pull your Mars creatures off the board, they count as part of your hand, you count your cards up, and for every card in your hand, you subtract away from the +9 that's on it. Can have incredibly powerful effects if you have other cards to play with it. If you can play Key Abduction, then Battlefleet after that, and it allows you to reduce past the regular key cost, you could go all the way down to 0. So this card right here is a very powerful card. It's one of the most powerful card draw cards in the game. especially when combined with key abduction. You get your Mars board down at some point in the game, you know, or on your turn. You use your key abduction, you use your battle fleet, you have a ton of Mars cards in your hand, and you're going to just draw even more cards. There's just a lot of ways this can be used, but it's just a really, really powerful card, draw card. With Nepenthe Seeds, this just becomes even more powerful. This is on par with Library Access, probably not as powerful, but very, very close. This is a very big card draw because it's for every Mars card in your hand. And if you're drawing a whole hand more, plus the Mars cards you already had, you Nepenthe it back out, play it again. That's just, I mean, you're just going to have a metric ton of cards. So very, very good card. After that, we're going to look at House Dis. And as you've probably noticed, the cards in the houses are getting, there's more cards in each house as we go. I started with the houses that had the fewest unique cards. It's one of the reasons that Brobnar is my least favorite house. It just doesn't have a lot of unusual and unique cards in it. Shadows doesn't have a ton of unusual and unique cards in it, but it has a tremendous amount of steel and some really good cards in it. And same with Sanctum, Untamed, and Mars. They don't have huge numbers, but they have enough. It's just Brobnar, I feel, is really light on just unusual cards. So the first card we're looking at here is Keyhammer. Keyhammer is it's one where it allows you to unforge a key. Now, this one right here, I don't know if this synergizes with Nepenthe Seeds or not. I'd have to know an official ruling on it, because if it does synergize with Nepenthe Seeds, this could be an incredibly powerful combination with Nepenthe Seeds if your opponent made it to 2 keys and you bring them back down to 0. Don't know if that's possible, but if it is, that would be incredibly, incredibly powerful. This does synergize really well with things like Lash of Broken Dreams and other things, but it's the only card in the game that can unforge a key. So that alone makes it a very unique card and very interesting to have. After that, we're going to look at Creeping Oblivion. Creeping Oblivion is the only card that allows you to clear cards out of a discard. I can't think of any other cards that let you purge cards from a discard. None that I can think of, except for Annihilation Ritual, which is also in here, but it purges them as they leave play. I can't remember if it's as they enter discard or not, but once it's, yeah, so Annihilation Ritual. This one, when a creature would enter a discard, so it's before it enters the discard, you purge it. So any creature that would go to discard is going to get purged from the game. If you have a creature light deck with Annihilation Ritual in it, or multiple Annihilation Rituals in it, that's going to be a really powerful deck, because if you have ways to clear your opponent's board on a regular basis and you have Annihilation Ritual and they can't get rid of it, they're going to be up a creek real fast. Or you may potentially put them in a position where they've got a bunch of unique cards that were really powerful in the first place. I don't know, it could backfire. Still a fascinating card. The only one that really purges all the creatures as they die. So great card anyways. After that, we're going to look at Library of the Damned. Now, this is one of the more powerful archive mechanics in the game. This is one of the more powerful archive cards in the game, because this is a continuous effect. It's an artifact. Artifacts are harder to remove than creatures. There are ways to remove artifacts, but there's not as many ways to remove artifacts as creatures. So Library of the Damned is just going to let you keep archiving cards, and this can really allow you to go through your hand in a quick way to get to the other cards that you want to get to much faster in your deck. It can also let you archive cards that you don't need to use yet, but you want to keep. Things like key stoppers and stuff like that. So this is a really, really interesting archiving card, and it's an artifact. So very, very nice one to have. After that, we're going to look at Restrin Gunthus. Now this is the only card in the game that lets you stop your opponent from declaring a house. And so, now it's a strength 1, so it's going to be a little bit easy to get rid of. But if you had this guy in a deck with, say, Shadow Selves, Nepenthe Seeds, or ways to bring him back, this could be a really, really powerful creature. So, because of his effect, not because of his strength. you could really kind of shut your opponent down a lot of different ways. I doubt there's more than one in a deck. If there's two in a deck, that would be crazy, but I doubt there's more than one of these. Either way, still a really interesting card, great effect. After that, we're going to look at the Ember Imp. Now, the Ember Imp isn't really powerful again, but this really kind of limits your opponent's ability to play cards. Now, if they can get rid of this with a card, or get rid of it quickly, it doesn't have a lot of an effect. But if they can't get rid of it quickly, you're really, really handicapping their play. They can't play more than 2 cards. It's going to make it really hard on them. And so it's a really good card if you can keep it in play. And it's the only one that really, truly, heavily limits their card play, other than ones that would disallow them to play a house. After that, we have a Rise. This is the only basically res in the game. This will bring all of your creatures in your discard back from that discard of whatever house you've declared. So as long as your opponent's not purging those creatures, you get a whole bunch of them in there, you cast a Rise, or you use the action Arise, you bring them all back, and then you can re-enter them on the board during either your dis turn, if you call dis, or whatever turn when you call that other house. So great, great card, and the only other card that does something similar would be Regrowth, but it's on a much, much smaller scale. After that, we're looking at Hecatome. Now this card is an interesting one because it can be used in a couple of different ways. It can be used as a board wipe for disc creatures. Now you're going to give your opponent Amber when you do so, but you could use that to your advantage if you have cards that would manipulate your opponent's Amber. You can also use this as a so like for example, you play this and then you play Drumble, which I believe steals if they have 7 or more, steals all of it. And then your next turn you could be ready with something else like, Doorstep to Heaven or Too Much to Protect, or there's other things you could do after this. So you can use this in a way that most people probably haven't really considered much. You can also use it as a big Amber game for yourself by killing off your own creatures and then arising them. So there's a lot of ways that this card can be used that are very interesting. After that, we're going to look at Hysteria. Now, Hysteria is an interesting card. This is just you return all the creatures to their owner's hand. Now, for you, this could be a great thing. You return all their creatures if they have multiple houses on the board, and you return your creatures, but then you can play all your discs right back out. So this card can have a lot of really good uses. It's just a really interesting card to have, and so I do really like this one. Oh, sorry, this is to its own. Yeah, return each creature. Yeah. Okay, I read it right. After that, we're going to look at Life Ward. This is the only card that I can think of that strictly says your opponent can't play creatures. So if you play Hysteria and then play Life Ward after that, you've got board dominance, at least for that turn. And if they are unable to, if they can't board wipe, you've got pretty significant board dominance for a while after that. So really interesting card. And it's an Omni, so you can use it on any turn. After that, we have Control the Weak. Now, this is one that basically says you get to pick a house. Now, this can be, if you had, say, Rester and Guntus, Control the Weak, and maybe a Nepenthe seed on the board, you could Rester and Guntus them, declare a house, Control the Weak them, make them pick that house, Nepenthe seed, Control the Weak back to your hand. On the next turn, do the Control the Weak again, and you've shut them down for 2 turns because they have to play houseless. So this card really can do some crazy stuff if it's in the right deck with the right combinations. Very powerful card either way because you are getting to pick which house they play. So if you know you don't want, they have say House Brobnar in their deck and you don't want them to burn all of your stuff, the odds that they're going to have good Amber control in House Brobnar is pretty low. And they may, some Brobnar do, but overall it's probably not going to be great relative to some of the other houses. Or Untamed would be another good one to call because Untamed has very poor Amber control. So this card can be very useful for controlling them and making sure that they pick what you want. A fair game. Now this card is, again, the only card that does what it does. And this one lets you basically play all your cards out on your in your turn. If you basically plan to have a huge disc turn, and you play out all your cards, and then each of you have to take a card from the top of your deck and reveal their hand, and they you gain 1 amber for each card of the discarded card's house revealed in their hand this way. And so you don't have a lot of cards in your hand, and when they repeat the effect on you, you're gonna get they're gonna get almost no amber, and you're gonna get quite a bit as long as you play it right. So this can be a really powerful amber gain for you and very little for them. Very interesting mechanic. After that, we have phase shift. We're going to House Logos now. Now, House Logos is probably the one between House Logos and House Dis. These two houses have probably the most unique cards that are just unusual. House Logos has cards like Phase Shift, which is the first one we're looking at, which allows you to play a card off house. Now I didn't include a lot of creatures in here. There are creatures that if they stay on the board for a turn or more, they start doing things. But because those cards are a little bit easier to clear off, I didn't really include them. Because I didn't include board wipes, I didn't include the creatures that cause either minor board wipes or damage across areas and stuff like that. I didn't include those. If I did, there would be more included into, say, for example, House Brobnar. But there's also would be a lot more creature cards included in all the other houses, because all the other houses have a lot of creatures that do unusual things. So I tried to really limit that. But back to Phase Shift. Phase Shift allows you to play a card that's not House Logos. This can be a really powerful effect. It's the only one that lets you play a card out of house instantly, right at the moment as you play the card. After that, we have Knowledge is Power. Now this one has 2 effects. It's either archive your cards or gain a ton of amber based on your archive. If you have a really strong archive deck with this card, you're going to get a ton of amber when you play this card, or you're just going to continue to archive even more cards. So just a great card in general. After that, we have Mobius Scroll. This is the most powerful archive card in the game. If you can get this thing into play and your opponent doesn't destroy it, you're going to be able to archive cards every other turn. You're going to archive cards pretty much as you end up wanting to with Mobius Scroll. You're going to bring it into play. You're going to take on your next Logos turn, you're going to take 2 cards out of your hand, archive them with Mobius Scroll, and you're just going to repeat that anytime you want to. So really, anytime you're playing a Logos turn, you can really just kind of add more and more and more cards to your archive using Mobius Scroll. Now, of course, you're going to draw your archives every time, but there's ways you can kind of manipulate this where, for example, you're playing Logos this turn, Mobius Scroll's already out. You then are planning on declaring House Sanctum next turn. You archive 2 Sanctum cards. You pick your archive next turn. You play your Sanctum with your extra 2 Sanctum cards. Then you declare House Logos again. You archive 2 more cards, or you play down your Mobius Scroll. And you just kind of slowly but surely roll these cards. But this is the only archive that just kind of comes back and goes back in and out of the game, which is just really interesting. I guess there are technically cards, creatures that are more powerful for archiving, but again, creatures are easier to clear than artifacts. So there's just going to be a lot more ways that an opponent can get rid of your creatures. So this artifact is just a little bit harder to get rid of, and just does some fascinating stuff. So after that, we have Library Access. This is just a really, really powerful card. It has the potential to do insanely powerful things, combined with cards like Phase Shift and Wild Wormhole. This card could draw, if you had a Nepenthe Seed out, play Library Access, Nepenthe Seed it back into your hand, play it back out again, play a Phase Shift and maybe a Wild Wormhole, and then the rest of your Logos cards that now you've drawn into, you're going to potentially draw your entire deck before you actually run out of Logos cards. So if you can get this thing doubled up using Nepenthe Seeds, or even tripled up using Nepenthe Seeds, you're going to draw every single card, and you're going to be in a position that is insanely powerful. This is the most potentially powerful and probably most potentially broken card in the game. I think probably any deck containing this and Nepenthe Seeds combined, or any card that can bring this back, has the potential to be some of the most potentially broken turns, not necessarily the most powerful deck. Because you do have to draw into them, so some decks may defeat you before you even draw those cards. But overall, this is an incredibly powerful card. Combined with draw mechanics and archive mechanics, you can get to a card like this really, really fast. So, great card. One of my favorite and probably one of the most powerful cards in the game. After that, we have Psychic Bug. This is the only card that lets you look at your opponent's hand. And looking at your opponent's hand in this game can be way more powerful than I think most people really understand. Because understanding what your opponent has in their hand can tell you whether you want to generate a ton of amber. Can tell you whether you are going to get that key off. What they might do on their next turn. This can just be incredibly good, especially with how fast their hand can cycle. If they don't get rid of this card, you're just going to keep looking at their hand every time you play Logos, and that's going to give you a tremendous advantage in gameplay. So, and that's because of the rapid overturn of hands in this game. It's not like, other games where you look at their hand, yeah, they gained one card and maybe two. They can gain up to 5, 6 cards in a single turn if they have a hand full of one thing or another. So this can be a really, really powerful card. It can be played to great effect, and it's the only card I know of in the game that allows you to look at your opponent's hand, so just fascinating on its own. Now, it is a creature, so it's easier to clear from play. After that, we're going to look at Fogify. Fogify is a very interesting card because this one is going to stop your opponent again from using their creatures to fight. Now, it's not the only one that does that mechanic. I believe Untamed also had a card that does the same thing. It's called the Fog Bank is the one it is. And so it's not the only one with the effect, but it's still one of the few cards that has the effect, and it's a very powerful effect. This can be really bad against an opponent who relies heavily on a board, and you're relying on other things, and you're just keeping your board around, and they're using their board to get rid of your board. Some decks are designed that way, and they don't have a lot of board wipe beyond using their creatures. And so this can just be really, really good under those circumstances. After that, we've got Scrambler Storm. Now, this one is really, really good, and it's the only one that basically stops your opponent from playing action cards. This shuts down the mass majority of all the large amber wiping cards. It shuts down a tremendous amount of these kind of cards that I've been showing you. Most of the cards I've been showing you are actions or artifacts. The mass majority of all these cards are actions. Very few of these things are even artifacts or creatures. There's an occasional artifact or creature in here, but the mass majority of all these cards are actions. So this shuts down all the other cards that have just been shown to you, as well as your opponent's ability to wipe your amber pool in a big way. So if you're really close to a key, you get to 7 or 8 amber in your turn, you play Scrambler Storm. Unless they have something already in play that can take care of your amber, there's very little they can do to stop you. Now, there are some creature cards with capture and some with steal, but there's just a very limited number of cards at that point they can use to stop you. And so if they've been holding onto a card to stop you and it's an action card, this just shuts it down. And this is the only card that does shut down action cards. So another great card. Now, Reverse Time. This is a really interesting card. Reverse Time has the potential to do some really, really crazy stuff because it's allowing you to pull your deck and your archive, pull your deck and your discard, and you swap them. And then you do discard this. Now, if you have Nepenthe Seeds, again, we come back to Nepenthe Seeds, one of the more powerful card retrieval cards. You can then kind of cycle that as you want in kind of an unusual way, because then your Nepenthe Seeds will then go back to your draw. And so if you can keep your discard and your deck at a certain ratio of cards, you can kind of keep them where you want them and keep your draw what you want your draw to be and your discard what you want your discard to be. And so there's some weird ways you can manipulate this card. I've been trying to figure out really interesting ways to manipulate this one, but it's just a fascinating card. I don't know about its power level. It's just a weird one. It's something that has the potential to do some really, really bizarre things. And so under some circumstances, this card could be crazy powerful. If you drew into this and drew into some of your really powerful cards, key forging cards and other stuff early on, you can then just make those your deck because you like the way your deck, the way your original draw was. And so then you start your whole draw phase again using the same powerful cards. And so in that way it would be really powerful. But if your original draw kind of sucked, then this wouldn't be very good to play at that time. So it's just a weird card that has a lot of unusual potential. So I do like this one. It's just weird. After that, we have Effervescent Principle. This is another big amber clear. And as you've probably noticed, every house except for Brobnar has a really Brobnar and Untamed have really big amber clears. Now the one in Mars is a rare, and the one in Dis is a rare. But the one in Sanctum, Shadows, and Logos are not rare. So you're going to see these cards more frequently. But Brobnar only has a few amber manipulation cards. Now it does have the one that it has, but it's one of the weaker ones. But it's also an uncommon. So there is a good amount of amber manipulation just across the board. And Brobnar does have a lot of capture, and so does Sanctum. Now, this one right here is you and your opponent are both going to lose half their amber round down. So if your opponent has had a big amber turn, this can be the difference between them forging the key or not. If they've had a gigantic amber turn, this isn't going to stop them. If they're at 20 amber or something insane. This isn't going to stop them, but it will bring them down a considerable amount. So still a really interesting card. Yet another kind of unusual mechanic in the game. After that, we're going to look at Dysania. Dysania is the only card in the game that can wipe Archive. So nothing else in the game can touch the Archive other than the person who put it there. Dysania is the one card in the game that can go, oh, you have a giant Archive. By the way, I have Dysania, and let's wipe that. A deck with Dysania, if the rest of the cards were good, has the potential to be really, really dangerous against any deck that relies on Archive. So I love the fact that a lot of these cards exist because they're able to counteract some of the things that I think are more powerful. Archive, I think, is one of the more powerful mechanics in the game because it allows you to have gigantic turns, and Dysania is the card that allows you to eliminate those gigantic turns. And once you get this in play with Nepenthe Seeds and other ways, you can bring this back, and with Regrowth, with Nepenthe Seeds, with a Rise, anything that can bring this card back, you can then use the play effect again and wipe the Archive all over again, unless they purge it. So really, really good card. Great way to get rid of your opponent's Archive, and the only card that you'll get that can manipulate an opponent's Archive. After that, we get Interdimensional Graft. Now, Interdimensional Graft is one of the two cards that gives you amber when your opponent forges a key. The other one was the Sting. Now, the Sting, I think, is harder to use than Interdimensional Graft because you can't forge a key while the Sting is in play. Interdimensional Graft is just an action card. Your opponent is going to forge a key. You know they generated, 13 amber because they were waiting for you to wipe it. You chose not to wipe it. You played interdimensional graft instead. They forged their key on their turn. You get all the remaining amber. So it's the only card that will do that. So it's a very unique effect on its own. Very, very cool card to have, and yet another unusual mechanic. After that, we have Dimension Door. Now, Logos is not well known for having a tremendous amount of steel. It has basically two major steals in it, which is Bat Drones, which are a steel 1 with Skirmish, and they're a 2 strength creature. And then you have Dimension Door. So Dimension Door turns your Reap into a steal. Now this is a fascinating mechanic. So all the creatures, because Logos does have a lot of creatures that have Reap abilities. So when they Reap, they do something else. This synergizes well with the House of Logos. And so if you had multiple Logos creatures in play, this can do a lot of steal on your creatures. So it's a fantastic card, very interesting one, and the only one that has an effect like it. So yet another unique card. So those are kind of the unique cards that really exist in the game, and there's quite a few of them, and they belong kind of to all the different houses. There's no house that is the king of unique cards, but Brobnar definitely has the fewest unusual mechanic cards. Its mechanic cards are almost all fight, and like I said, if I was including fight or use mechanics, this pile of cards would be much, much bigger. And so I chose not to include that because I didn't want to have, just a gigantic pool of cards sitting out here. So it's not that House Brobnar doesn't have other cards that do things. It just doesn't have a lot of unusual mechanics. And I didn't include like all the amber gaining cards because there's just a tremendous amount of them. I included the ones that are really strange. So these are really what I think are kind of the weird cards in the game. And I do really like these kind of cards. I think these kind of cards are really what make a deck interesting. When you have cards that can do unusual mechanics. And it's like I said, it's really the reason that I'm not a huge fan of House Brobnar. It just doesn't have a lot of unusual mechanics. Its mechanics are very much, smash him in the face. And I know some people like smash him in the face. So for people who do like that, I've already covered House Brobnar, but I don't think that they have a lot of unusual mechanics that do unusual things. Now, there was a card from House Brobnar I didn't include. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the one that for every damaged Brobnar creature you have, your opponent's keys cost 1 more. Now that is probably the biggest key cost increaser in the game. That and Lash of Broken Dreams are basically the 2 big ones. I think Lash of Broken Dreams is still a better card. I'd rather have 2 Lash of Broken Dreams. And the reason that is because clearing a board is not super hard, especially if you have multiple cards in your deck designed to do so. I do think it can be a very good mechanic. I do think a House Brobnar deck that had that mechanic and had, say, multiple Rises or some other stuff could be really, really powerful. I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure it exists. I wouldn't be surprised if it is a super powerful deck. I just haven't seen that combination as of yet. I have seen the card. I have it somewhere in my collection. I just missed it when I was going through. But these are, like I said, these are the cards that I think are the most interesting, have the most interesting mechanics. Other than creatures, the creature cards I didn't include, that I'll make another video at another time about powerful and interesting creatures. This is just powerful and interesting cards. So we'll get to powerful and interesting creatures later. This is the artifacts and the action cards primarily. So there you go. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a wonderful night.